Here is a psychological truth most people are not ready for. You can lose your strength long before anything in your life actually falls apart. Sometimes you lose it in the exact moment you speak too early about something that was still trying to take shape within you. Maybe you have felt this before. You tell someone about a plan, a realization, a fear, or a decision that was still quiet and fragile inside you. And almost immediately something changes. The energy drops. The clarity fades. The direction that felt alive a moment ago suddenly feels weaker. No one attacked you. No one directly destroyed what you were building, and yet something in you feels smaller, as if part of your inner force slipped out the moment it became public. Carl Jung understood this at a very deep level, not as a simple lesson about privacy, and not as an argument for becoming closed off or suspicious of people, but as a law of the psyche. Some things lose power when they are exposed too early, not because the world is always hostile, but because the inner world has stages of development, and in its earliest stages, it is highly vulnerable to reaction, projection, doubt, misunderstanding, and expectation. There are things that need silence, not because silence is fear, but because silence gives form to what is still becoming. Most people never think this way. They assume that speaking is always healthy. They assume that the more they explain themselves, the more real they become. They assume that openness is automatically a sign of maturity. But the psyche does not work that simply. Some things ripen through expression. Others are weakened by it. Some truths become clearer when spoken. Others become distorted the moment they are handed over to other people. That is what this reflection is about. There are certain things you should not reveal too early. Not because they are shameful, not because everyone around you is dangerous, but because your deepest movements deserve protection while they are still gathering strength. Inward maturity is not measured by how quickly you speak. It is measured by whether you know what should remain in silence until it is ready to stand on its own. The first thing most people reveal too early is their plans and goals. At first, this seems harmless. You share a new idea, a new direction, a new ambition. You talk about the business you want to start, the life you want to build, the body you want to create, the change you want to make, the work you want to leave behind, the version of yourself you are trying to become. It feels natural to speak about these things. Sometimes it even feels exciting. But at a deeper level, something far more subtle is happening. Jung used the word libido in a much broader sense than ordinary desire. For him, it referred to psychic energy, the energy of life itself, the force that moves inward and outward and shapes the path of becoming. When a plan is new, that energy needs containment. It needs depth. It needs concentration. It needs to move inward long enough to become structure. But when you speak too early, that energy is often discharged before it has taken root. This is one of the strangest illusions of human psychology. The moment you explain your plan, you can feel as if you have already made progress. If people respond with excitement, you feel validated. If they praise you, your mind takes a shortcut and registers some of the reward before any real action has taken place. And if they react with doubt, concern, or skepticism, the opposite happens. You begin defending, explaining, justifying, or second-guessing something that had not yet reached the point where it could carry weight from outside. In both cases, energy is lost. The psyche is pulled out of the work and into reaction. Think of a seed. It does not become strong by being displayed.
It becomes strong by disappearing into the soil. In darkness, it forms roots.
In silence, it gathers direction. If you take it out too early and hold it up to the light, you do not accelerate its growth. You interrupt it. Plans are like that. They do not need an audience in the beginning. They need inner ground. Many people live in an endless cycle of inspiration without completion for this very reason. They keep announcing new beginnings. They keep describing what they are about to do. They speak beautifully about change. But the more they talk, the less force remains for action. What looked like a motivation problem was often an energy problem. Too much of the original impulse was spent in words instead of work. That is why people who truly build something often become quieter as their vision becomes more serious. Not because they are playing games, not because they are trying to appear mysterious, but because they know that a new direction must first become real in action before it is exposed to social reaction. A goal should be protected until it no longer depends on applause or survives in spite of doubt. The second thing you should not reveal carelessly is your fears, insecurities, and weak points. Modern culture often confuses vulnerability with indiscriminate exposure. It tells people that healing begins the moment everything is spoken out loud. But Jung would have approached this far more carefully. Fear is not just a thought. Insecurity is not just information. These are shadow materials. They belong to the part of the psyche that needs conscious relationship, not careless display. When you reveal your fear to someone who lacks depth, they usually cannot hold it well. They do not know how to contain it. They respond with their own anxiety, their own projections, their own shallow interpretations, or their own need to fix what they do not understand. And once that happens, your fear stops being something you are listening to inwardly and becomes something the outside world is now shaping. This is where many people become even more confused. They think they are seeking relief, but they are often surrendering authority. A vague fear that still needed reflection suddenly hardens into identity because someone else reacts to it as if it were already the whole truth. A wound that needed silence and intelligent observation gets covered with labels, advice, panic, or simplification. A person says, "I think I am not enough." Someone replies, "Maybe you are too hard on yourself." Or maybe people really are judging you. Or maybe that is just how life is. On the surface, these responses sound harmless, but in reality, the original material is now being mixed with someone else's shadow. And unless the listener is inwardly mature, they rarely help you carry your darkness. More often, they add their own to it. That is why not every fear should be spoken the moment it appears. Some fears should first be observed in silence, written down, faced directly, asked questions. What exactly am I afraid of? What old story is waking up here? What part of me feels threatened? What dependency is hidden inside this fear? What is this emotion trying to show me about where I have not yet become strong? Fear is not always an enemy. Very often it is a messenger. But if you expose it too early to the wrong people, you lose the chance to hear its original message. You trade understanding for temporary regulation. You begin needing outside reassurance in order to feel safe enough to face yourself. And little by little, the psyche learns a dangerous lesson. I can only hold my fear if someone else softens it for me. That lesson weakens the center. Inner strength is not the absence of fear. Inner strength is the ability to remain present with fear long enough to understand what it is asking of you. That does not mean never speaking to anyone.
There are wise conversations. There is therapy. There are mature relationships.
But there is a difference between sharing with depth and scattering yourself because you cannot tolerate uncertainty. The shadow is not healed by being shown to everyone. It is healed by being integrated in the right environment, at the right depth, at the right time. The third thing you should not announce too early is what you no longer want to pursue. This is one of the most delicate phases of inner life. It is the moment when something old begins to lose its claim on you. A role, a career, a relationship, a habit, a path you once pursued with conviction, a version of yourself that once made sense but no longer feels alive. Many people assume that as soon as this shift begins, they should explain it. They should declare it. They should justify the transition out loud. But that can be one of the easiest ways to weaken a real transformation. When psychic energy begins withdrawing from an old direction, the process is fragile. The old structure is not fully gone, and the new one is not yet fully born. You are no longer what you were, but you are not yet fully what you are becoming. That in-between state is vulnerable. If you speak too soon, other people almost always respond from the image of you they already know. They urge you back towards stability. They ask if you are sure. They remind you what you have invested. They warn you not to be reckless. They become the voice of continuity at the exact moment your psyche is trying to complete a necessary departure. Often they do this without malice, but the effect can still be damaging. People feel safe when others remain predictable. The moment you stop fitting the role they know, your change unsettles them. And because they cannot feel what is happening inside you, they interpret your transition from the outside. Their reactions may sound reasonable. Their doubts may sound practical. But if your inner movement is real, those outside responses can pull energy back into a life that is already ending within you. This is why some endings should happen quietly. Not every chapter needs a speech. Not every departure needs a public explanation. Not every shift in identity needs to be discussed while it is still taking place. Sometimes the most mature thing you can do is simply stop feeding what no longer belongs to your path. There are people who stayed in dead directions for years because they spoke too soon about leaving. The outside world reacted. They started defending themselves. They tried to prove that they were not unstable. They forced themselves to remain in old structures just long enough to become exhausted, discouraged, and divided against themselves. What they lost was not only time. They lost intimacy with their own deepest voice. There are old paths you should leave without negotiation. There are roles you should quietly outgrow. There are identities you should not drag into public debate while your soul is still trying to step away from them. The moment of withdrawal is sacred. It should not be forced into social performance. The fourth thing you should be very careful with is the deepest layer of your inner process. There are experiences, symbols, dreams, insights, and inner movements that are too subtle to be handed over to people who only live on the surface. You may go through something real and psychologically important, a powerful recurring dream, a symbolic image that will not leave you, a quiet shift in identity, a deep reorientation of values, a change in the way you feel meaning, a subtle but unmistakable movement toward a truer life. But if you rush to explain this to people who have no language for depth, they will often flatten it, reduce it, mock it, or translate it into something shallow.
And once that happens, you may begin doubting what was once real to you. Jung understood that the psyche often speaks in symbols before it speaks in concepts. The unconscious does not begin by presenting a neat explanation.
It presents images, patterns, repetitions, dreams, tensions, strange attractions, inner resistances, emotional atmospheres, and hidden recognitions. These things are often meaningful long before they are easy to explain. If you expose them too early, you may cut the process off before the deeper truth has formed. A meaningful dream can become a joke in the wrong room. A genuine inner shift can be dismissed as overthinking. A real symbolic experience can be reduced to stress or fantasy or a passing mood. Again, the damage does not always come through cruelty. Often it comes through simplification. And simplification can be one of the most destructive responses to a deep process, because it trains you to distrust what cannot yet be reduced to ordinary language. That is why not every inner experience should be translated immediately. Some things need to be lived before they are explained. Some symbols need to stay with you long enough to shape your consciousness. Some truths need to move from image into embodiment before they are handed to language. When people lose connection with their inner life, it is often not because the inner life stopped speaking. It is because they kept exposing subtle experiences to environments that could not hold them. Little by little, they learned to abandon what was deep in favor of what was socially recognizable. They chose legibility over truth, and after enough repetitions, they no longer knew how to listen inwardly at all. This is the deepest layer of the whole subject. The question is not simply what you tell people. The real question is this: who has the right to interpret your life while it is still becoming? That is the psychological core. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, requires a return to the center. It requires a life that is no longer built only through social reflection. At a certain point, you must stop asking the world to authorize what is unfolding in you. You must stop treating every inner movement as if it becomes real only when someone else sees it, approves it, validates it, or understands it. This is where silence becomes powerful. Not empty silence, not avoidance, not emotional withdrawal, but containing silence. Silence as a vessel. Silence as a discipline. Silence as the space in which psychic energy gathers instead of disperses. Silence as the refusal to hand over your process before it has become your own. Most people do not realize how often they speak too soon because they cannot bear the tension of becoming without witnesses. They want immediate response, immediate confirmation, immediate comfort, immediate clarity. But real inner growth often asks for the opposite. It asks for the ability to remain with the unfinished, to let something be unclear for a while, to let a plan become action before it becomes language, to let fear become insight before it becomes conversation, to let an ending complete itself before it becomes explanation, to let a symbol deepen before it becomes presentation. This is not weakness. This is maturity. You become inwardly stronger when you learn that not everything sacred should be made public on its first day of existence. You become more whole when you stop confusing expression with completion.
You become less dependent on the world when you stop forcing every internal movement into social reality before it is stable enough to survive there. So, what does this mean in practice? It means you begin asking a new question before you speak. Not just, is this true, but is this ready? Not just, do I feel this, but is it formed enough to survive contact? Not just, do I want to share, but why do I want to share? Am I offering something whole, or am I looking for permission, comfort, relief, or proof? That question changes everything. It means you start protecting your goals until they have roots. You work before you announce. You build before you explain.
You let results strengthen the structure before the structure is exposed to reaction. It means you stop handing your fears to anyone who happens to be available. You learn to observe them first, to write them down, to ask what they are really pointing to become capable of holding them without turning every moment of insecurity into a public event. It means you leave old directions with less noise. You stop feeling obligated to explain every inner shift before it has completed itself. You let some endings happen in silence because not every departure requires a witness. And it means you treat your deepest psychological process with reverence. You do not expose symbolic, spiritual, or transformative material to people who lack the depth to recognize what they are touching. You let some things remain in the protected chamber of your own becoming until they have become strong enough to stand outside of it. In the end, this is not about secrecy. It is about preserving inner authority. There are things you should never reveal too early because they belong to the most living part of you. Plans that still need roots. Fears that still need understanding. Endings that still need quiet completion. Inner processes that still need sacred space. The world does not need access to everything at the exact moment it appears in you. Some things are damaged by premature contact. Some truths are weakened by outside interpretation before they have become stable within you. Some forms of speech are not liberating. They are leaks. If there is one thing worth remembering, it is this. Not everything valuable should be spoken at once. Not everything alive can survive the gaze of the world in its earliest form. Some things become real only because you had the discipline to keep them in silence long enough for them to become strong. That is not fear. That is wisdom. And if you listen carefully, you may already know what in your life needs that kind of protection now. What plan needs more work and fewer witnesses? What fear needs more understanding and less exposure? What old identity needs a quiet ending? What inner process needs privacy before language? Perhaps the strongest thing you can do is not to say more, but to hold what matters until it has become fully yours.